Coming up on Network Africa. Leading South African opposition politician Julius Malema is sentenced to 5 years after being found guilty of illegal possession of a gun and firing it in public. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says he does not pay attention to Elon Musk over his accusations of racism with the Starlink licensing. Plus, it's been 3 years of war in Sudan. The UN warns this is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Thanks for staying with us, everyone. I'm Amarachi Ubani here in Lagos. Pan-African activist Kemi Siba has been taken into custody in South Africa. Authorities say Siba, wanted in Benin for inciting rebellion, was apprehended in Pretoria alongside his teenage son. Police allege the pair were attempting to flee to Europe through Zimbabwe with the help from an accomplice. The activist is accused of backing a failed coup against President Patrice Talon, a claim that sparked an international arrest warrant. Now facing charges including conspiracy and immigration violations, Siba remains in custody as extradition proceedings begin. The 45-year-old is known for opposing French influence in Africa, backing West Africa's military leaders. He's also been accused of spreading Russian propaganda. The police say that the individual who assisted Siba and his son had been paid about 250,000 South African rand to help them move across the Limpopo River into Zimbabwe with intention to further proceed to Europe. And in South Africa, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, Julius Malema, has been granted leave to appeal his 5-year sentence by the Kugombo Magistrate Court in Eastern Cape. Malema was earlier today sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for a firearm case. He was convicted in 2025 of 5 charges, including unlawful possession of a firearm and discharging a weapon in a public place over the 2018 incident at a stadium in the Eastern Cape province.
Today. The outcomes of today will determine whether there will be SONA tomorrow. Fighters, we need to unite this continent and make it one and speak in one voice if we are to become a player in the international politics. Look, today, South Africa is under attack. The whole of Africa is quiet. But if it was one of those African countries, we were going to be expected to say something as South Africa. But now that we are under attack, the continent is quiet. The unity of Africa doesn't start with the establishment of a United States of Africa. It starts with supporting each other as countries and standing together against imperialism, against dictatorship of Donald Trump. So we need that unity because Trump has realized that the continent is divided, and therefore it can become a playing ground for USA imperialism. We must never divide our continent, because if we do that, we are inviting America to come and steal our mineral the same way they are stealing oil in Venezuela, where a madman can declare himself a president of another country. That thing of South Africa sending that diplomat of Israel pegging, it's a proper one. It's a proper stance. Those are the kind of decisions we support. But we don't want that, just that individual. We want the whole embassy of Israel closed down and leave South Africa. There is a parliament decision about that. So you act all brave about an individual. The problem is not the individual. The problem is the whole Israel embassy sharing a territory with us when they are murdering children and women in Palestine. This is not a fight against Jewish people. This is a fight against apartheid Israel and its representatives everywhere. So you must not find Jewish people going to, what do they call it, mosque? What? Synagogue. Going to pray. Jewish people going to pray. You are there. We will flex at the church.
Earlier, my colleague Bukola Koka spoke to our South Africa correspondent Innocent Samosa on today's sentencing.
This case has been dragging for quite some time now, and we thought that today we're going to get some level of understanding as to where are we with regards to the case. But he was sentenced 5 years in prison, as you rightly alluded to in your intro. This, of course, includes him discharging a firearm in a built-up area. And of course, the second count was that he was sentenced to imprisonment for unlawful possession of the gun. And of course, count 3, he's supposed to pay 20,000 rands or 6 months in jail. This speaks to the issues around reckless and negligence of the handling of the firearm. So count 5, he must pay a fine of 20,000 rands or 6 months imprisonment. But this whole issue, colleague, it has different elements. There is an element of legal, there's the political element as well. Let me start with the legal part. As you rightly alluded to, his team now, they have filed an application to appeal the ruling by the magistrate to say that he can't go to jail for 5 years, and they use Section 25 of the Constitution, because Section 25 of the Constitution in the country says that if a member of parliament or a public bearer is found or is arrested for 12 months, then they will have to abandon their duties in parliament or in public office. But when you then appeal it, you are disqualifying the Section 27 of the Constitution of South Africa when you appeal it. So it does seem as though the case is far from over, given the fact that there's this appeal. If they don't win with this appeal, they're likely to take it to the Constitutional Court. If they don't win, they might as well take it to the Concord. So we must just brace ourselves for this case. It does seem as though it's going to drag for quite some time, given these appeals that is disqualifying Section 47 of the South African Constitution. But a pretty much eventful day. I can say that it's going to be a sigh of relief from the economic freedom fighters, because he is indeed going home today. He's not going to jail, colleague. A magistrate made it clear that this is not because he's a political figure. In fact, in court, there was the complaint around the fact that economic freedom fighters are everywhere. People are not able to basically access the court. And there were also complaints around the aircons in court, saying that it's hot inside the court. So there were many complaints, really, to say that he is not the problem. The problem is that the court did not put measures in place to basically accommodate the figure of Julius Malema, because knowing that he's a big political figure in the country, obviously, when you have such people in court, you will have their supporters outside court chanting and standing with them in solidarity. So the court should have maybe put measures in place. But of course, his legal counsel had blamed the court for really not putting measures in place to accommodate a figure of Julius Malema. Many people are standing, from the economic freedom fighters, as you would rightly know, they are standing with him. But many commentators are saying that this could very well be that if he goes to jail, his party will gain more traction, because you would recall when President Zuma was arrested, he came out with that sympathy from voters. He started Umkhonto weSizwe Party, and right now as we speak is the main opposition party. So there is that element where if he does go to jail, so to speak, he will then have, because we're moving towards general elections, people might have that sympathy and say that he was arrested, he's a freedom fighter, he's fighting for this and this and that, so therefore he deserves our votes.
Our correspondent Innocent Samosa, a great milestone for Sudan, marking 3 years since the start of its most recent war. The United Nations now describes it as the worst humanitarian crisis, with nearly 34 million people in urgent need of aid and millions forced to flee. Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling for an immediate ceasefire, warning that civilians remain under relentless threat. At a major conference in Berlin, aid leaders painted a harrowing picture of violence, starvation, and attacks on hospitals and schools. Here in Nigeria, though, the government has reaffirmed its support for peace and stability in Sudan. It will work to strengthen bilateral relations between the two countries. The assurance was given at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs during a courtesy visit by the ambassador of the Republic of Sudan, Mohammed Abdelal, at the ministry's headquarters in Abuja. Ambassador Ahmed Abdelal noted that Sudan and Nigeria share long-standing historical and cultural ties rooted in centuries of interaction, migration, and mutual cooperation. He emphasized that both countries remain closely connected with shared interests in regional peace and development. The meeting explored avenues for strengthening bilateral cooperation, including the proposed convening of the Nigeria-Sudan Political Consultations Committee to address issues of mutual interest. Let's bring in now African Liberty contributor Gideon Ajay Mawuto. He joins us from Accra, Ghana. Gideon, thank you for joining us on the program. Sudan has been at this war for a long time. The recent fighting seems to only add to what already existed before, a worsening humanitarian situation. The UN describes it now. How bad do you think the situation is on the ground?
It is difficult to overstate how catastrophic the situation in Sudan currently is. So what we are witnessing now is not just a conflict, but a full-scale collapse of state collapse with profound humanitarian consequences. So since the fighting ignited in April in 2023 between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, millions have been displaced internally and across borders. Large parts of the country, especially in Darfur and Khartoum, have seen the breakdown of basic services such as water, healthcare, food systems, and conditions of farming are becoming greatly present in this region. And beyond just the numbers, there are incredible reports of systemic human rights violations, ethnic targeting. There's been sexual violence against women, and then sexual violence has been used as weapons of war against women, and even the recruitment of child soldiers. And so this is simply the worst humanitarian crisis that we can think of in this particular first quarter of the 21st century.
The UN commemorates or calls attention to the fighting on its anniversary every year, but we don't hear any real action, apart from resolutions that go nowhere. Do you think the organization is simply romanticizing the situation instead of treating it with the urgency it needs?
I think I would resist from framing it as romanticizing, but it is fair to say that the response of the United Nations has been structurally constrained, in many ways insufficient, even relative to the urgency of the situation at hand. But the UN operates within limits set by member states, particularly the Security Council. And in Sudan's case, the geopolitical division among major powers have made it extremely difficult to move beyond statements and resolution and towards decisive action. And commemorations and annual observations are quite important. They help maintain visibility, but they can actually become or feel hollow when they are not paired with consequent action. And the issue is less about romanticization and more about institutional paralysis. Here we see that the UN can highlight crisis, but it cannot compel political will where it is absent. And so the frustration is really justified, but we can look deeper at the problem and see that it lies in the lack of alignment among powerful states and major powers, and not just merely the UN symbolic actions.
Yeah, and today we have the Iran war, the war in Ukraine also hugging the headlines. Africa's issues are put in the back burner. How has failure by the international community ensured that the war has gone on for this long?
Yeah, clearly the prolonged nature of the conflict in Sudan reflects a broader pattern of selective engagement by the engagement in international politics. See, conflicts like those involving Iran and Ukraine receive attention because of their strategic implications for global powers. And Sudan, by contrast, suffers from what we might call geopolitical marginality. It does not command the same level of urgency in global power calculations. And so we can see, for example, with the Iran, US, and Israel war ongoing, with the Strait of Hormuz, and how that has affected global oil prices. And so that is one of the things that fuels that attention, and limiting attention into the crisis that we are seeing in Sudan because of its geopolitical marginality. But beyond attention, there's also been some systemic failures. There have been failure to apply consistent diplomatic pressure on armed actors and their external backers. There's also been a failure to cut off armed flows and financial networks that sustain conflict. And lastly, there's also been less support for like African Union's mediation efforts to deal with the fallout that is happening in the Horn, in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa.
Gideon, thank you again for your analysis on the issue.
Thank you for having me.
We're off on a short break on Network Africa, still ahead. Pope Leo is in Cameroon, where he's urged the government to root out corruption. Stay with us. Welcome back to Network Africa. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa shrugged off tech billionaire Elon Musk over his accusations of racism over Starlink licensing. The president said he's paid very little attention to the comment because he knows South African laws are not racist. He stressed the constitutional imperative to redress the imbalances of the past. The South African president clarified that there are also opportunities available to offshore-based companies that have difficulty in complying with the Black Economic Empowerment structure or architecture. In a series of posts on X, the South African-born tech entrepreneur Elon Musk called the B legislation racist, claiming that Starlink cannot operate in the country because he is not black.
I pay very little attention to that because I know our laws are not racist. They are empowerment laws that are meant to empower the various people in our country who were discriminated against. And discrimination was perpetrated against black people, in particular Africans, colored and Indians. It was perpetrated against the women of our country. May I say, white women were also affected. And what we are seeking to do in implementing the constitutional imperative that is in our constitution is to redress the imbalances of the past. And to do so, the constitution has empowered us to pass laws that are empowering, not racist. And it's interesting for me that he does not talk about the racist laws of the past, because those laws of the past actually said black people may not do A, B, C, D.
32 years since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, people gather to commemorate the start of an event that can never be wiped from the country's history. In Nigeria's capital, Abuja, a ceremony led by the Rwandan High Commissioner, Moses Rugima, kicked off a period known as Kwibuka, which honors the lives of the over 1 million people lost, supports the survivors, and promotes unity and resilience. Members of the diplomatic corps and the international community are here to support Rwanda as it commemorates 32 years since the genocide against the Tutsis, a Bantu-speaking ethnic group in Rwanda and Burundi, targeted in the 1994 event. The High Commissioner of Rwanda, Moses Rugima, recounts briefly how the genocide was executed right under the watch of the international community, and how many years later, Rwanda has emerged a nation that confronts its past.
On the night of 7th April 1994, the machinery of extermination was activated. Roadblocks appeared overnight. Militias moved with chilling efficiency. Lists of names had been prepared in advance. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Children were not spared. In just 100 days, more than 1 million people were killed. That is 1 in every 7 Rwandans, in the fastest genocide in recorded history. Families were torn apart, communities were destroyed, and humanity itself was tested. And yet, even as these crimes unfolded in plain sight, the world hesitated and found refuge in procedural ambiguity. The truth was obscured, mischaracterized as chaos, conflict, anything but what it was, a genocide. At the United Nations Security Council, moral clarity came from a few countries. The ambassadors of Nigeria, Ambassador Ibrahim Gambari, the ambassador of Czechia, Ambassador Karel Kovanda, and the ambassador of New Zealand, Ambassador Colin Keating, spoke truth to power and called what was happening in Rwanda what it was. We applaud their courage.
He warns against genocide denial and distortion and the need to counter these threats.
Genocide denial and distortion are finding new platforms, including in some Western capitals. We must be clear. Silence in the face of such warnings is complicity. Stronger legal frameworks, better education, and greater accountability are urgently needed to counter these trends.
Representative of the UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator, Ms. Beatrice Ayon, emphasized the dangers of hate speech if allowed to spread unchecked.
Digital platforms allow hate speech and incitement to violence to spread faster and further than ever before, fueled by artificial intelligence and misguided algorithms. The ancient toxins of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, and anti-Muslim bigotry are once again corroding our political discourse. We hear outright denial, we hear distortion, we even hear the glorification of past genocides. Genocide against the Tutsi shows us where this path can lead, when words are weaponized and the world waits too long to respond.
Kwibuka, meaning remember in Kenya and Rwanda, is the annual commemoration period for the genocide against the Tutsis. It starts April 7 and lasts 100 days. Pope Leo has been in Cameroon for the second leg of his Africa tour. He's told the Cameroonian government to root out corruption, saying in order for peace and justice to prevail, the chains of corruption which disfigure authority and strip it of its credibility must be broken. In a gathering that was with President Paul Biya, who won an 8-year term in a disputed poll, and his administration facing criticism over allegations of corruption, bad governance, and a failure to tackle insecurity. Pope Leo blasted those who spend billions on wars, saying the world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants This, he said, during a peace meeting at St. Joseph Cathedral in Bamenda, the city at the center of Cameroon's separatist insurgency, which has left at least 6,000 people dead and many more forced from their homes.
Because it is true, I am here to proclaim peace. Yet I find it is you who are proclaiming peace to me and to the entire world. As one of you observed, the crisis impacting these regions of Cameroon has brought Christian and Muslim communities closer than ever before. Indeed, your religious leaders have come together to establish a movement for peace through which they seek to mediate between the opposing sides. I wish this would happen in so many other places of the world. Your witness, your work for peace can be a model for the whole world.
Pope Leo XIV in Cameroon. And before we go, here's our fun facts about the continent. Did you know that Mauritania was historically part of the famous Dakar Rally? This renowned off-road endurance race, originally known as the Paris-Dakar Rally, started in Paris and crossed through several African countries, including Mauritania, before ending in Dakar, Senegal. Mauritania's vast, challenging desert landscapes made it a key section for the rally, adding a unique and difficult stage of the event with its vast dunes and remote, rugged terrain. Due to security concerns, the rally's routes was shifted to Saudi Arabia, where it continues today. And now, thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.